we're finishing up looking at diet and the dietary choices we have right now. We have some great speakers for you. But I'd like to start us off thinking about a person who's changed our culture and the way we think about food, and that's Michael Pollan. He teaches locally at UC Berkeley. He started writing about the nature of food and published his first books, which became instantly famous. The New York Times listed his first book, The Omnivore's Dilemma, as one of the 10 best books of that year, 2006. And I boiled it down to some key points that we might want to just touch on today as we approach this idea of selecting a diet, each of us, and making sure that we're on the right dietary path for ourselves. So he suggests the following in this article, which is much more extensive than this, but just to give you an introduction to his thinking, that we should avoid food products. And he separates the idea of having fresh or real food from processed food products. He's suggesting that we should buy real foods. That's the foods without the labels, and that this whole takeoff of really creating products that we substitute for food. And with that, the rise of what he calls nutritionism. This nutritionist ideology has taken over, and we have a trouble really discerning qualitative distinction between foods. An example, fish, beef, and chicken becomes a mere delivery system for varying quantities of fats, proteins, and vitamins. And yet these foods are very different. And we're not talking about the context of these foods or the quality of these foods. We're simply measuring objectively defined by these food scientists according to their scales. And there's so much in food that we don't know how to actually measure. So recognizable foods have been replaced with highly brightly colored packages that now sell terms like fiber and cholesterol and saturated versus unsaturated fat and so on. The reigning nutritional orthodoxy is that an avocado might be either high fat food, thus to be avoided, that's old think, or a food high in good monosaturated fat to be embraced, new think. So the fate of each whole food rises and falls on this nutritional barometer or nutritional measuring stick that we're being told every so often, this is good for you, no, that's really not, this is better. Many nutritional studies, studying one nutrient at a time, is not about the science, which takes the context out of the food and the food out of the context of the diet and the diet out of the context of lifestyle. So he's suggesting replace that with this whole topic of eating real foods. Pay more, you get more quality typically, better in taste and quality of food, and also eat less. That calorie restriction has been shown to slow aging, is very important. And eat mostly plants, especially the leaves. They contain more of the nutrients that we really want. Cooking food, making food something that you're involved in instead of buying out so often. And if you can, create a garden and start gardening. Have a direct and intimate relationship to your food. It really enhances that food context really matters. And then to eat like an omnivore, that we really have an intuitive connection to food and really honoring that. And the diversity of our diet is what it's truly about to be a human being. So eating food, not too much, and mostly plants is sort of his byline for his article. So rather smart dietary choices, of course, fruits and vegetables, good fats, whole and ancient grains, herbs and spices, of course, healthy drinks, and they're foods that do worsen inflammation. Of course, processed foods, sugars, refined grains, and processed foods, and certainly processed meats and red meat itself. Foods to consider with care are oils, certain dark poultries, and of course pork and natural sugars are much better than processed sweets. And as we'll talk about, unique bodies require unique reactions to food, which my co-host Marissa will talk about. So food inflammation is a big deal. Michael Pollan started us off with simplifying how whole foods can really help in this whole process. And with that, he set the tone of our last 2 decades for how to really think about food versus those things we're often buying that have food labels. So my co-host, Dr. Marissa Sosky, has a lot to share with you today. Marissa, it's all yours.
So I'm going to be talking about something called biochemical individuality. So biochemical individuality is helps you, what Ken was just talking about helping determine what's right for you. He kind of went over some of the general rules, which Michael Pollan outlined, which are awesome. And this kind of helps fine tune it a bit. So what is biochemical individuality? So everyone is a unique and individual snowflake. Just like a snowflake, each of us is a different design. We have different genetics, we have different influences, and therefore our nutrition and our dietary patterns should be reflective of that. So I work a lot with nutrition with my patients, and I tell them there's not one diet that works well for everybody. It's really about finding what works for you. And I coach them on different things and help them explore that. So this is kind of a synthesis of some of those big concepts that I explore with them. So there's a number of factors that go into biochemical individuality. So I'm going to go through each of one of them one by one. The first one is genetics, and we say the first one because it's what you're born with. And this is your DNA. Although genetics aren't just what you're born with, because it's also how you express your genes. And so a big piece of this is ancestry. So for instance, an example is people who tend to come from Northern Europe tolerate dairy very well, but pretty much everyone else from anywhere around the world didn't grow up, or traditionally there weren't cows there on the land, and so they didn't have dairy, and so it wasn't something that their body knew how to process. And so there's different things like that where we talk about what did your ancestors eat, because the way that your ancestors eat set up the way that your DNA was being expressed and the different enzymes that were being expressed so that you could process the food that was in your environment. And that's something called epigenetic changes, which are little flags and markers on your DNA that changes the way that they're expressed. So while each of us has the same, pretty much, 99.99999% of the same DNA, the way that expressed is different, and that epigenetic markers are what controls that. Then also you can have things called enzyme mutations. So one thing that's come up quite recently, gotten really popular, is the MTHFR mutation. And so that's an enzyme that processes folate and methylation in the methylation cycle of folate in the Krebs. It's kind of an offshoot of the Krebs cycle. So that if you have a mutation in, let's say, the MTHFR gene, the way that you process B vitamins is going to be different than somebody who doesn't have that mutation. And so that can factor in, and that's just one example. There's a lot of different enzymes that are affected there. CYP SNPs. So SNP stands for single nucleotide polymorphism. And this is a really wide expanding area of genetics right now, where they're seeing there's these one little change in the DNA code in people, and it changes everything. It can change the way a whole protein is expressed. And so CYP stands for cytochrome P, usually P450. And then there's a lot of different subcategories of that. And those are all our liver enzymes, and the way our liver detoxes and processes chemicals in our body and our food and everything. So if you have either compromised liver function, compromised CYP function, or just different small mutations that you've accumulated over time, that's going to change the way that your body processes food, and therefore it's going to change the way that you're able to eat. And then lastly, blood type. So your blood type is determined by your genetics, and there's a whole diet that's based on this, on the blood type, and we'll go more into that later, but that is something that influences based on the proteins that get expressed on your red blood cells. So another factor is your constitution. And so I pull constitution from more traditional medicine philosophies. So I have Chinese medicine here and Ayurvedic medicine here. So they have different analyses or different definitions of constitutions. So in Chinese medicine, you have the 5 elements. So you have wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. And they are a different combination of hot, dry, cold, and that determines what you should be eating. So, and then also that changes not just your constitution, but where you're at in the moment. So if let's say if you have too much heat, they would recommend cooling food to cool you down, and vice versa, same with wet and dry. Ayurvedic has a similar thing. They separate it into 3 doshas, they call them. So Vata, Pitta, Kapha. And Vata is usually cold and airy, cold and dry. Pitta is hot and wet, and Kapha is cold and wet. And so there's talk of a fourth dosha, but that's controversial within the Ayurvedic community, so I won't go there. So that can really factor into what foods are going to be best for you based on your constitution, and then also which of these is in balance in you in the moment. Then your environment can play a huge impact on what you should be eating. So kind of going back to the constitution, but instead of an internal force, this is an external force. So when you're in the desert, for say, and it's hot and dry, are you going to be eating a bunch of hot soup? No, probably not. You're going to probably want some nice cold drinks, cool you down, although there's different philosophies on that too, that maybe you should be eating spicy food in the hot environment, and that helps. But your external environment also plays a role in what you should be eating, and also what's available to you in your environment to eat if you're trying to go along the whole eating local route. Involved in your environment is also toxic exposure. So there's a lot of toxins in our environment. It's involved in the whole foods versus food product, which is life is not simple anymore. We've really added a lot of chemicals and a lot of processed materials into our environment, into our lives. And these impact most importantly, they impact our liver. And so all of these weigh on your liver. They can change your microbiome, as we talked about last week. And all of that influences the way that your body's able to process foods. I would say too that a lot of these toxins are endocrine disruptors, so they disrupt your hormone balance, and especially radiation can really affect your thyroid hormone, and your thyroid hormone is one of the master controllers of your metabolism. So when your metabolism is out of whack because you're exposed to all of these environmental toxins, that can change the way that your body processes food as well. Mold is a really big one as well. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and San Francisco is also really big for mold because of all the fog and moisture. That mold makes you very, I would say a lot of people who are exposed to toxic mold are very sensitive to different foods, don't tolerate a lot of different foods, have the kind of this allergic picture where everything sets them off. And so all of these environmental toxins are huge, huge, huge impacts on the way that we process nutrition. And then, as Ken was saying, overall inflammation. So one of the biggest things is that the food we eat really impacts our gut. And when we eat things that are not good for us, and I'll talk about this more, we're going to talk about food allergies and intolerances and sensitivities, it causes inflammation in our gut. And when our gut gets inflamed, I know I'm not really big on this picture, but we have these tight junctions in our gut lining, and that prevents stuff getting into our bloodstream from what we eat until we break it down into small enough particles. And what happens is when we eat something that is inflammatory to us, those tight junctions loosen up, and then we start getting bigger particles of food getting into our bloodstream that aren't supposed to be there. And that causes an immune response because the immune system is used to seeing the little broken down pieces, but it's not used to seeing the big molecules and big proteins. And so the immune system goes, hey, that's not supposed to be there. And it flags and it lights up, and it causes this whole big immune response. So, and then that causes inflammation in the gut, causes inflammation all over the body, and causes all these different issues. So inflammation is a really big piece to kind of work on. And coming from a naturopath, almost all disease starts in the gut. And so this is a really good place to start with. If you have inflammation all over your body, always look to the gut and always look what's going on there, because oftentimes when you heal the gut inflammation, you heal all the inflammation that goes on in the body. And lastly, our microbiome is a huge factor in what we're able to eat. So I don't know if anybody out there, I can speak from my example, has switched their diet drastically overnight. So actually, when I was a student at SF State, I was like, I'm gonna go vegan. Like, I read a lot about stuff about, veganism, and I thought it was great, thought it was great for the planet. And I had been, an omnivore up until that point. Overnight, I switched. My body did not like it. I was tired. I had a lot of bloating and gas and all this stuff. And a lot of that has to do with our microbiome. Our microbiome is what helps us process all of our food. If you weren't here last week, go watch that lecture because we talk a lot about that. So I'm not going to dive into it too deep now. but it's really impactful. And so when we change overnight, we haven't allowed our microbiome to adapt with our change so that we can process those foods. Some people can switch overnight, but what I found more impactful is making small changes. So I now am mostly plant-based. I do eat a little bit of fish, but mostly plant-based. And I did it over time. So I started dating someone who was vegan, and we kind of both influenced each other. And so slowly I started eating less meat, and slowly and slowly and slowly. And that process, my body tolerated it super well. And now my body loves being on a plant-based diet. So that really allowed my microbiome to adapt with me. And then also to the impact of antibiotics. So antibiotics wipe out your microbiome, and that can cause a lot of changes in the way that you process food. I'll just touch on a couple more things, again, more in depth last week, but microbiome is important for processing B vitamins, your neurotransmitters, all kinds of things that are impactful. So, all right, so this is another big issue when deciding what is the best food or what is the right foods for you. So I want to talk about food allergy, sensitivity, and intolerance, and kind of what the differences are, because you hear those words get thrown around quite a bit, and they're often used interchangeably, but they're very different. So food allergy refers to an allergic reaction to a substance ingested in food. So that's, actually, I'm just going to say the definitions and we'll go more into it in the next slide because I have some more specific things. So a sensitivity is a delayed immune response or any poorly understood reaction. So sometimes people just react to foods. They don't know what's going on. Doctors can't figure it out. It's not an allergy. We would just say that's a sensitivity. That's kind of like the catch-all. But then there's intolerance, and intolerance is lacking the ability to digest a food. And I think this intolerance piece is so underrated and so under talked about, and is one of the most impactful things I've found with my patients is when we identify what their intolerance is, it changes everything. So some of the foods that so you can kind of look at this picture. This is some of the most food sensitivity causing, most of the issue causing foods in terms of food sensitivity. So we have dairy, gluten, grains, soy, yeast, nuts and seeds, caffeine, sugar, citrus foods, eggs, nightshades, and processed foods. And I'm going to add a little piece of another piece of that when we this next slide. So this is kind of the difference between all of these different categories of sensitivity to food. So so the immune response is important because you have different types of antibodies that you make. So you have IgE, IgM, you have IgD, and you have IgG. So IgE is your fast immune response. That's your anaphylaxis. That's your people who are allergic to peanuts. They eat peanuts, their throat closes up, they can't breathe, they swell, they get hives. It's quick. The onset's within a few minutes, at most a half an hour. So that's a true allergy. Very few people have true allergies to food. I did have a roommate though while I was living at SF State who had a allergy to watermelon. So we weren't allowed to have watermelon in the house. That's just a really rare and unique one. But most commonly it's peanuts and shellfish. And so the way that this is tested for is through an allergy test. It's where they do little skin scratch with different allergies and they test your reaction. People who have these allergies often have to carry an EpiPen so that if they get exposed to any of these, they can give themselves epinephrine so that they don't go into anaphylaxis and can't breathe. The next one is a sensitivity. And so this is a slow immune response. So your IgG immune antibodies come on slow. This is what happens when you have leaky gut and things get through the gut barrier into the bloodstream, and your immune system creates antibodies to it. Some people react to a lot of things. Some people have sensitivity to a lot of things. If anyone out there has ever taken an IgG panel and had a lot of things light up, that is often an indicator of leaky gut versus you're truly reacting to a lot of those things. Now, if you've taken an IgG panel and a couple of things lit up, that's more of a true sensitivity to those things. But again, it's monitoring that immune response. The reaction to this can be variable. It's different for different people. Some people it's gas and bloating. Some people it's diarrhea or constipation. It can be headaches. It can be joint pain. It can be a lot of different things because again, it's that inflammation piece. This is that immune response. So it can manifest in many different ways for different people. An example of this is sulfur containing foods. So onions, garlic, brassicas, some people are very sensitive to that. And also gluten. Gluten is something that you can have definitely a sensitivity to, and it's a small immune response, it's a delayed immune response, but it's not an allergy and it's not an intolerance, which is more what celiac is. Celiac has is actually kind of interesting because it has pieces of all of this, but that's another discussion. So the testing for sensitivity is usually an IgG panel, although I'm going to talk about another way you can test sensitivities later. The next piece is intolerance. And again, I think, like I said before, I think this is one of the most underrated pieces of looking at food individuality. So this doesn't necessarily cause a primary immune response. It can cause gut inflammation, but it's a little bit different than an IgG response. So I say secondary as it causes inflammation, and that is an immune response, but it's a little bit different than a sensitivity. The reaction again is very variable. It depends on the patient, or sorry, it depends on the person. It depends on the food. You can have multiple intolerances and have different reactions to different foods. So I'll say my intolerance, I'm intolerant to potato and also to sugar. And when I eat those things, my mood, my anxiety, depression swings are huge. And I found when I eliminate those foods, my mood is much more stable. And I'm a much better person to be around. And so some of the most commonly, so I'd say the conventionally recognized, and I say conventionally as in conventional medicine, recognizes only 3 intolerances. So that's lactose, gluten, and fructose. Lactose intolerance, pretty common. You've heard about this. So this intolerance, again, is lacking an enzyme. So when you're lactose intolerance, you're lacking the enzyme lactase to break down lactose. For gluten, there's I'm forgetting the enzyme right now, but it's to break down gluten, and fructose is, I'm forgetting the enzyme right now too. Should have written them down. But these are all about lacking enzymes. And so what happens is when you lack the enzymes to break these down, it builds up toxic metabolites in your blood that back up your liver. So your liver is now having to process it, but your body can't really process it because you don't have these enzymes. And so that's what causes these reactions. And that's why it can manifest in so many different ways for different people. Is it's like getting stuck in your blood and it's not getting out. And your body's like, I don't know what to do with this. And eventually it does. For anyone who's lactose intolerant, causes really bad diarrhea. Your body's just like, get it out of me. And so sometimes it can take up days or weeks for people who are intolerant, who get exposed to their intolerances, to clear. So there's a number of different tests that you can do for this. One is an enzyme test. You can also do a blood typing, because they would say that blood, if you follow the blood type diet, that's an intolerance as well. You're intolerant to certain foods based on your blood type. And then the CFIM. So the CFIM stands for the Carroll Food Intolerance Method. I actually just did, I was familiar with this test before this weekend, but I did just do a training in this weekend. And this is another another test for food intolerance. So if you have any questions about that, or more in depth, I love, since I'm totally down to talk about the rabbit hole of food intolerances, feel free to reach out to me personally and we can talk more about that. But there's a lot of different tests that people have come up with. And so in general, so there's stool tests, and they'll give you information. This is kind of outside of these specific things, but there's just a lot of tests out there. So Ken had asked me about metabolic typing in a previous conversation. So there's actually a test that's called the metabolic typing test that gives you information on this. There's various stool tests, there's various microbiome tests. There's a lot coming out nowadays in this world of testing to see what foods are right for you. And so I'd say, depending on what practitioner you see, a lot of these you're going to have a hard time getting on your own. You're going to have to talk to a provider or practitioner to get these. But everyone's going to have their own favorite. And I was talking to a lot of old docs. They each test in different ways and they get good results from all of them, I mean. So I don't think that there's necessarily even one test that works best. It's just really working with a practitioner that gets good results the way they do it. And then taking the information, and if it doesn't work for you, try another test. And there's so many pieces of this. And this is a great segue into this, which is how to determine which is the right nutrition style for you. So I think there's 3 big ways to do this. So testing, like we were just talking about, and it may take a couple tests, and you may do one test and try to follow that diet and it doesn't work for you. And then you try another one, you follow that, and you're like, wow, that was the money. That works great. That's kind of what happened with me. I tried the blood type diet, for example. My father has been doing that since, maybe 20, 25 years now. He swears by it, changed his life. And I tried it, didn't feel any difference. But I took an intolerance test, and that changed my life, where other people take that test and it doesn't necessarily change. So I think, play around with it. The elimination diet is one that you can do for free, which is you essentially take out, there's a couple of different ways. So the most extreme way is you take out all of the major food allergens from your diet for 3 weeks. You let your gut heal, and then you introduce them one by one every 3 days and see how you feel. And so that's a free way of doing it. It takes a little bit more dedication. You do have to cook for yourself. It's almost impossible to eat out during those 3 weeks while you're eliminating foods and then reintroducing foods. But it is a very cost-effective way of doing that. The other way you can do it is if you think that one food or a couple foods might be bothering you, you cut that one food out for 3 weeks, reintroduce it, and then see how you feel. Now that just takes longer, because instead of cutting out all the foods at once, introducing them every 3 days, you're having to go in 3-week intervals. But that's another way to do it, and it's less restrictive up front. And then I would say just try out different diets. If you're interested in the vegan diet and you've never gone vegan before, try it. See how you feel. See if you feel good. If you don't like it, you can always go back. Same with keto, same with paleo, same with all of these diets. Play around. Especially if you're young, this is a great time to just explore and experiment. I know when I was in naturopathic school, I must have gone through at least 5 or 6 different diets over the years that I was there, just trying them out and seeing what works for me. And it's always going to change, because your body's always going to change. And so always, I would say, don't be dogmatic about it. Always go with the flow. Go with the adaptation. And then I had a teacher once who we asked him, what's your favorite food and food testing? He goes, well, I just usually ask him, well, how do you feel when you eat it? And they go, well, I feel crappy. And I say, well, then don't eat it. So so that's just a piece about listening to your body. And oftentimes we want to ignore what our body's saying because we want to eat those things. I love potatoes. I love French fries. I love hash browns. I love everything potato. But when I listen to my body, I go, yeah, no, my body doesn't like that. And so I can try to ignore it, but it's going to be better in the long run for me to not eat them. So now I think we're going to go talk about different nutrition styles. And I'm going to say this instead of diet, because I think diet has this connotation of dogmatic. Oh, I have to follow this dogmatically. I have to follow this diet. If I break it, I'm breaking my diet. Versus nutrition style, which is a little bit more flexible and a little bit more, kind to yourself. And that this is just the style that you're eating. This is a pattern of what you're eating. It's a little bit more adaptable and it leaves a little bit more room for play.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching this video. I'm joined today by Tammy Butterfield, who has both a Bachelor's of Science in Nutrition and a Master's of Science in Nutrition. Her business is Planted in Health, and she works in Portland, Oregon. So I'll turn it over to Tammy. Do you mind introducing yourself a bit more and what your path and how you got here?
Sure. Well, I'm a local to Oregon, and my hometown in Portland. I got here by way of, like many people, I was experiencing my own health issues, and I was trying to approach it through food because most of my issues were digestive related. So I decided to do my own research, and then that led me to exploring that I had a passion for food and I had an interest in nutrition and food relationship and all that. So I went to the National University of Natural Medicine. I was part of the first group of undergrads to get a Bachelor's of Science in Nutrition. And I loved it so much that I decided to keep going. And I earned a master's of science and nutrition this past June, just graduated. And also, while I was in the program, I was experiencing symptoms of perimenopause. So that also got me on the area that I really like to focus in, which is on women's health, especially for women 35 and older who are either entering or in or whatever the menopause transition, and helping women through foods and lifestyle help to manage those symptoms so that we're not feeling like puberty 2.0 is taking over. So that's kind of my background. I love food. It's part of my daily everything from every shape and angle.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us. So, so I think that your focus is, and what we're inviting you here today is to talk about the paleo diet. So would you mind describing this diet or this nutrition style for folks who don't know what that is?
Sure. I'm not a big fan of the word diet because I think for a lot of people, it brings on that sensation of, oh my gosh, I can't eat what I love to eat. So in some cases, yeah, we might have to do a restrictive diet. I like that in the medical terms. But as a way of eating every day, as a life choice, I like nutrition style, as you put it. So to me, I look at the paleo way as more of a style versus a diet, but it can be treated as a diet. In general, the way I kind of imagine it in my head and how I try to explain it to people is, imagine you have this time machine and you bring back somebody from your ancestry that was back before the industrial food system was created, back before agriculture was invented, before we were farming and growing and raising our own food. So back during a time when our ancestors would have to go out and hunt and gather food. So imagine bringing them back, and you take this ancestor of yours to the grocery store to go get food. Now imagine that they're standing in this grocery store and they're trying to figure out what is food. So if they walk the grocery store, I imagine them going through different aisles and picking up boxes of things, going, huh? And then dropping it on the floor like, I don't know what that is. But if they walk over to the produce section and they see all the fruits, the vegetables, the berries, the nuts and seeds that could be over there, they'll recognize that as food. If they walk over to the meat section, the butcher section, and they'll see the whole chickens and the fish and maybe some of the meat that's got the bone in it, they'll recognize that as food. So in a way, the paleo diet looks at those foods. That's how I look at it, is it's what they would recognize as food. So it's eating predominantly those foods. The paleo diet does recommend no dairy and no grains and no legumes. And some of the information that I read about it is kind of iffy. And I understand the idea, the thoughts behind it, but it's still questionable. So I also try to explain to you, like, the paleo diet is not completely restrictive. It's very flexible in the sense that you can add other whole foods to it, based off of what your body can handle. So it is a really whole food, natural, no GMO, organic. It's all pastured or wild meats, foods that I feel like our body can really truly understand.
Awesome. And so what do you love about this diet? Why do you eat this way for yourself, and why do you walk your patients through, or your clients through this?
I found through my own experience with it, and also from some of the research, is that it really helps with digestive issues, because I'm eliminating certain foods that are known to be issues for people. So I really like that. It's starting at a very core basic root of just natural whole foods that you would get out there. And then I also love that you can build upon it. So you can modify it to meet someone's specific, what I call nutritional orientation. As an example, cow milk proteins, I have the worst symptoms if I eat them. I call my hangover symptoms. So through exploring foods and doing these kind of diets where I eliminated dairy and then added it back in, that's how I was able to find this. But I was able to find as well that I can eat goat or sheep dairy versus cow. So I've been able to talk to people about how to use this to figure out what their nutritional orientation is. We might read that lentils are great, and they are great, but they may not be great for person A or person B, but they're great for person C. So I really like that we can adjust it, and there are ways to even bring it out of the caveman era and bring it into how we are now, to meet us what our needs are now in our lifestyle, which is very complicated and modern today. So that's what I really like about it.
Awesome. You mentioned some of the digestive health benefits. Are there any other health benefits that you've noticed when working with people?
A lot of the health benefits that have come out of it that I've come across is it does address a lot of metabolic syndrome issues. So cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure. So I found also in my research as well, like I said, I like working with women 35 and older, that it also helps with LDL and HDL levels and bring them into a healthier level. It also helps to maintain muscle mass for women, because once we reach age 40 and older, we start to lose muscle mass. So the amount of protein and healthy protein that you eat on this diet helps to maintain muscle mass as well. So just everything that I've come across so far has pointed in a positive direction of having overall better health, including improving the gut microbiome, as well as energy levels being balanced, blood sugar levels being balanced, oral health as well. As I'm sure as you know, that's an area that we sometimes don't talk about in terms of the connection of digestion and nutrition is our oral health. So that's another area that they've shown that oral health is improved through the paleo nutrition style.
Awesome. Are there any contraindications or certain groups of people who maybe aren't good to be following this nutrition style?
You know, I was looking into that more, and I've been trying to find like who would not be a good candidate for this. And I think that in that area, there might be people who might have a compromised liver, compromised kidney, if they have a family history of certain cancers, maybe that they would need to work directly with the healthcare professional to watch their proteins, because this diet does promote eating animal proteins, and there's some research out there that points to a correlation between high red meats and cancers. And then if someone has kidney issues, then they're going to have to be careful of some protein levels as well. So I would offer, if anyone wants to do this, and that they do talk to their nutritionist or their other healthcare professional that has experience with nutrition, to find out how they can keep an eye on things until they know for sure that this works for them.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I agree totally. Are there any potential nutritional deficiencies that may result from this diet that maybe could be supplemented to fill in or?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so when you reduce grains, there's some B vitamins that are in grains. So when you're not eating a lot of grains, then there is a potential that they could have lower levels of B vitamins. You can supplement, like take a really good supplement. And again, I would recommend going to a health practitioner that can recommend specific brands of supplements, because not all supplements on the market are adequate and healthy and good. But the other thing is with this diet, because it is like an ancestral diet, our ancestors used to eat every part of the animal, including the parts that we don't really think about eating today, the organs. So eating liver, you're going to get those vitamins and minerals because they're going to be there in the liver. So the diet does recommend eating liver. I'm still struggling with that one myself, I admit. I can handle a little bit of pate, but don't cook me up in a liver. I'm like, I've tried. It's my challenge. But like I said, those are there. There has been some talk about calcium, because there's that whole idea if you're not consuming dairy, you're not getting calcium. But as we've been learning, there's calcium in fish, there's calcium in broccoli, there's calcium in almonds. So there's other sources of calcium besides dairy. So we won't really be missing that. It's just understanding how to create a well-balanced plate, bowl, wrap, whatever you're doing. Figuring out how to balance all of those food items together throughout the day, and you'll get everything.
Great. Yeah, those are really good points you brought up. So this is more just a fun question to finish out on. What's your favorite dish to cook and why?
Well, okay, yes, I love that question because whenever we think about some of these ancestral diets, we think about, well, they didn't eat pancakes or waffles. And I love pancakes and waffles, and yes, I do. I follow some paleo recipe creators on social media, and I have a few recipe books. So I have a classical waffle paleo recipe that I've used for years, and I use it as a base to make pancakes, to make waffles. I can adjust it to add sweet potatoes. So I love it. So I'm not giving up my waffles, my pancakes. I can still have them. And I've actually turned my partner onto them and some other people onto this recipe, and everyone has just really loved it. And they don't feel like they're missing out. So, and it doesn't take a bazillion eggs in the recipe either, which is nice.
Well, is there anything else about the paleo diet that you feel wasn't asked about or wasn't touched on that you want to make sure folks hear about before we end today?
Sure. I think something that can go out there a lot with the paleo way or any of the other sort of diets that are out there is that people can create a dogma around them and really create this really restricted eating. And I just caution for people to try not to do that and to really take it with an open mind and open heart approach. Because our relationship with food also is part of our whole eating and a part of the nutrition as well. And when we start restricting ourselves to the point where eating food becomes a chore versus a pleasure, then I don't think we're going to get out of it what we really want and what our body really needs, our mind, our body, and our spirit. So that's one area that I recommend. I also recommend, doing your research on it, reaching out to people who don't take a dogmatic approach to it as well, and asking them questions. I'm always open to people asking me questions about it and what I like and don't like, and what resources I would recommend that they look into to find out what would fit them personally. Because I really do like the diet for so many reasons, like the ones I've mentioned. I also like the environmental aspect that it takes, where they look at where our food is coming from, the health of our food before it gets to us as well. So I really like that. I also like that it touches on culture as well, looking at our own personal ancestors and our culture itself, and thinking about that as part of the food process as well.
I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who I am very excited to introduce you. He's a very good friend. So this is Wilfredo, or Will Benitez. He is a performance nutritionist and head nutritionist and owner of his company called On Pace Wellness in Portland, Oregon. He works primarily with athletes and those who enjoy or want to enjoy an active lifestyle, helping them to optimize their nutrition to elevate performance and health. As a performance nutritionist, a certified running coach, and as an athlete himself, Will understands the athlete mindset, what it's like to pursue athletic goals, and how to balance the pursuit of those goals with responsibilities. He is passionate about helping his clients strike the necessary balance to make the nutrition coaching process result in a sustained nutrition habits that support the client's goals. So yes, he is an avid runner. I know he probably went on a long run earlier today. And, and take it away, Will, and feel free to add anything to your intro if you'd like.
All right. No, I think you nailed it. It sounds like something I would write. So I think I'm completely happy with that. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Marissa, or Dr. Soski, if you prefer that. And Ken, sorry if you're also a practitioner of some sort. But thank you both, either way, for having me. Again, everyone, my name is Will. I am a nutritionist here in Portland, Oregon, although I work with a lot of my clients well beyond Portland. I'd say the majority of my clients are not in this area. So thank goodness for technology where I'm able to do that. And I am speaking to you on the vegan nutrition style. I agree. I do not like calling any of these things diets. I feel like diet automatically kind of lends itself to kind of like a temporary or just like a fad kind of thing. And I don't like that when it comes to, things that people can take on more consistently. And vegan is one of them, eating vegan. And so a little bit on my background with vegan in particular. I myself am vegan, my wife is vegan. We actually did it together. I think this past summer was 8 years we have been vegan now. We have not maybe accidentally a couple of times, but we have not deviated from it. In those 8 years, it's been something that we have been thriving with personally for us. And it's just really kind of met our needs. To start, like kind of what vegan is for me, I'll just basically define veganism for people who maybe not are very familiar with it, which is essentially just eating no animals, no face, right? That's an easy way of kind of wrapping your head around it. So there's no meat, there's no dairy foods. Those are the larger food groups. But then there's no seafood as well. For some, and this is the controversial piece, is sometimes there's no honey, sometimes there is honey. If there is honey, ideally it's kind of sustainably sourced honey. And they're taking care of their bees very well. But for the most part, no seafood, no dairy, and no meat, I think. No eggs, that's also in there. But I think that's it. And instead of the nose, I don't love talking about veganism in the nose, or even just nutrition in the nose. That's not how I practice myself. It's more about like, what are we eating a lot of? That's what I tend to focus on. But before I get into that, why my wife and I decided to choose to eat vegan, it was very much for kind of like personal health and athletic reasons. As Marissa mentioned, I am a performance nutritionist. I work a lot with athletes. My wife and I are both very active. She was a diver in college at our D1 university, and it continues to be very, very active. She did a triathlon throughout college. I run and play a lot of soccer, so does she. So it was very much for that. Like we both wanted to see kind of how our performances, because that was a daily thing for us, would improve, just kind of changing our diet. So it wasn't even like we just immediately thought, well, we'll go vegan. It was no, we'll eat healthier. Let's try that out and see how that makes us feel. And so we started off just eliminating certain foods. At the time, there's been a lot of research and kind of media was talking about how red meat's not that great for you. And so we kind of eliminated red meat to start, and then soy milk and almond milk started to take off, and there was a lot of conversation around dairy and reducing dairy can be good for you too. And so we did that as well. And then those two kind of like eliminated foods in our diet kind of led to going vegetarian. And so we did that for about half a year or so before we made the full transition to eating vegan. And so we wouldn't have done that if we weren't feeling really good, having not only eliminated certain foods, yes, we did do that, but also really increased a lot of different foods. That was a key for us. I was introduced to tofu and to hummus and to seeds. I wasn't eating seeds in my diet. That was not a thing. It was very much bird food. I wasn't eating sunflower seeds or pumpkin seeds or the omega-3 rich seeds. That just was not part of my food. It's not part of my culture. And so just kind of going that route, again, allowed us to eat, not allowed, but introduced us to a lot of new foods that I kind of more so credit to how we were feeling, just how our improved health, our improved energy. And yes, to some extent, kind of the foods we eliminated, but we were just, I was increasing so much nutritional variety, which I think is so key to an improved kind of gut health system and diverse microflores when we really diversified the nutrition that we are intaking, we tend to see those outcomes, and that just lends to improved health and wellness. And so we really felt that. And then, so it started off with, again, those like personal health and athletic reasons, and evolved probably within a couple of years or so to more of like, in addition to when people ask us why are we vegan, it's not just that anymore. It's environmental reasons, it's animal rights reasons, very much so, if not even more so than the health reasons at this point. But it did start off that way. But yeah, that's how it kind of segued and evolved over time. So I kind of talked a little bit about some benefits that we felt. Again, just kind of feeling really good from a health and wellness standpoint, but I'll get into a few specifics. And then I'll also kind of discuss kind of what I see with my clients and how I work with them. And I'll discuss that in a second. But for us, yeah, it was sleeping really well. Increased energy was huge. Like we felt that right away. Just this abundance of energy that we weren't really feeling, which is why we wanted to make a change. I think that was the biggest thing we were noticing, was like, wow, we're just so tired at the end of the day, not even at nighttime, just at the end of the day, and just not feeling really great through our exercises that, you know, we were doing that daily. And so we really noticed when things kind of felt off. And so that was, again, the biggest, most like the quickest change, I think, for us, was just the increase in energy. Again, the improving sleep, we, you know, some physique changes as well, just kind of as is pretty normal when you're going through dietary changes. I think that was probably the biggest for us. I think digestively, my wife would say that she felt better too. I think I felt worse in the beginning. And then, which is pretty common, just your increasing fiber, going through, I think, as Dr. Soski mentioned, that when you are going through these changes, especially if you're not doing it super gradually, it's just kind of to be expected that you might go through some experience some kind of GI issues or little issues here and there. And if you can work past it, usually the body adapts, but sometimes people just have to work past it. You know, my wife and I kind of had those experiences as well. What I see in my clients so how I work with my clients is I don't necessarily, I don't work only with vegans, and I don't, you know, work with them and make them vegan. I do kind of make their nutrition more plant-based. We are increasing a lot of more plant foods, more nutrient-dense foods. We are increasing fiber. And so when we're doing these things, we just are increasing plant foods. And so again, we're making their nutrition more plant-based. Some of them do decide, hey, I'm going to go vegetarian because I'm feeling so good with this. Some of them do decide I'm going to go vegan. Some of them are already vegan. What I notice, regardless, when we're just heading that direction of just the ratio of kind of processed and meat and animal-based foods to plant foods sway in the direction and favoring the plant foods, is kind of what I experienced myself. Increased energy. Some of these clients, these people are just like, I don't know why I wasn't feeling off, but I'm feeling so good now. And I credit that to that change. You know, their body is working with cleaner nutrition for the most part, especially if they're working well with me. It's easier for the body to handle, to process. It's pretty universally accepted that meat does not digest as cleanly and as efficiently as plant-based foods. And so, you know, a lot of people, if they already have underlying kind of GI issues or foods that they're eating that's kind of throwing off their digestive system, when you add meat and also for some people dairy on top of that, it just kind of makes the body work a lot harder. And so when we kind of reduce those foods or eliminate those foods, they just feel like they're lighter. They feel, that's really how they describe it. They feel lighter. They feel kind of faster if they're, you know, through their exercises. They just feel kind of cleaner. It's just this feeling that they just have, this internal feeling. So I see a lot of that. I see a lot of improved skin conditions that could be from, you know, reducing dairy, reducing sugars, improved sleep. Again, I think that when we are allowing and diversifying gut microflora, which we're doing by increasing these plant-based foods, we're just allowing for the body to operate in the way it really wants to, but, you know, environmentally, through our food, through work stress, life stress, we're just really hindering the body's kind of optimal functionability. And so when we kind of just change that one thing, which is again just kind of making our nutrition work for us, we see a lot, just the body again, the metabolic system, the endocrine system, just really operating in this really synergistic and wholesome way, which is great. So I do see a lot of my clients, not all of them, kind of thriving, and not necessarily on a vegan diet, but on a much more plant-based diet. And it's up to them if they want to take it to the next step and go vegetarian or go vegan. I don't push that on people. And so I think that's a good segue into what might be some contraindications for a vegan way of eating, or a vegan nutrition lifestyle. And so I did make a cheat sheet here. I hope that's okay. Because I did want to make sure that I touched on some of these. So I think the first thing, this goes for any, whether it's a diet or whether it's nutrition lifestyle, because I do think there are diets that do exist therapeutically for the most part. This one thing should be considered above all, and that's eating disorders. I 100% think that when you are working with someone with a history or active eating disorder, and you can say that it's always there for those people, or some degree of disordered eating, that restricting their food is not the best way to go. And with any diet or living by any nutrition lifestyle, there just tends to be restrictions. That's just the way it is, whether it's paleo or keto or vegetarian or vegan, it does not matter. You are saying no to certain foods. And I think with people who, again, have eating disorders or disordered eating, that's not the best route to go, especially in the beginning. So I think that's the first and probably most important contraindication. I think, Dr. Soski, you mentioned, you were talking about allergies and sensitivities and intolerances. For some people who, they just can't do a huge amount of food groups or foods that are kind of where we would get a lot of important nutrition for people who are eating vegan. If those foods are, they can't eat them. So not only are they, eliminating dairy and meat and eggs and seafood from their diet, but now based on their food allergies, intolerances, or sensitivities, they can't do soy, they can't do certain legumes or nuts and seeds. I mean, I've worked with many people, so I've seen like random foods that people just cannot tolerate. We need to consider that. We need to consider, we really need these certain foods for a lot of these nutrients or food groups, but you really can't do them for whatever reason. We'll investigate into that reason. Hopefully we'll figure out what's going on and kind of rectify that and get them to tolerate those foods. But in the meantime, maybe further limiting their foods is not best for getting them the proper nutrition. Now, yes, I could get them on supplements. I just don't like to have that be a crutch or a crutch for too long. I don't know how long it's going to take to allow their body, if we can even do it, to allow their body to better tolerate these food sensitivities or intolerances. Again, if we can get there. And so I don't want them to rely on supplements again for too long there. Some other contraindications could be very picky eaters. So people who just, for whatever reason, they choose not to, maybe they're kids or adults, they just choose not to eat in the way that's going to really help them thrive. And they're really hard and stubborn in that way. They may be people who I'd be a little bit concerned kind of getting them to eat vegan. Access is another thing. If they don't have access to these wholesome plant-based foods, literal access, they live in food deserts, for example, or just financial access, that's definitely something to consider because it's not going to be realistic or sustainable for them. So there are all these contraindications that are possible and so many more. And then lastly, I mentioned supplements, and I just do want to touch on a few nutrients. Iron, B12, those are probably the two main ones that come up for people who are going vegan. There's non-heme iron and heme iron, and you can look into that. Maybe it's already been discussed, but that isn't an area for consideration, I should say, for people who are going vegan. Just want to make sure that they're getting enough iron and that their body's absorbing it properly. B12, I mentioned, if you're getting rid of animal foods, a lot of vegans do want to make sure that they're supplementing with B12. And then the other ones that are less so necessary, but they are, in my capacity, do pay attention to them, are calcium, vitamin D, and omega-3 fats. Omega-3s, especially because we're eliminating seafood, and they are just so important for the body. And then you can get them from plant foods, but you just want to be just strategic and make sure that those omega-3 foods, especially chia, hemp, and flax seeds, are in your pantry or refrigerator at all times. I'll leave it at that, I think, just for time. I will end with, it's worked really well for me. Do I think it can work well for everyone? Sure. A lot of these things can work well for everyone. These things meaning nutrition, lifestyles. I think it's about consistency. It's about being open to adapting your lifestyle to kind of make this work. And then often, and there's probably many things I'm missing, work with someone who knows you, who knows your history, who can support you through finding what is going to work best for you. Maybe that's vegan, maybe that's something else, but I do think a lot of these things can work. Again, you just have to put in the work. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Dr. Soski, for allowing me to talk presentation style. I hope that was helpful and beneficial for people.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, you brought up some really good points. Thanks for bringing up the eating disorder piece too. I think that's a really important conversation of all of this, or impact on all of this. So we got one question. So we'll take this one question, and then if you're able to stick around, I have a few more slides to go through, but then maybe people have questions at the end also. So what about creatine, and where do vegans get it from? I've read research, this is someone saying this, I've read research papers claiming that vegans are deficient in creatine.
Yeah, so there are certain, especially amino acids, that people should be aware of. Lysine, leucine, these are examples where people need to kind of consider, especially if they're getting rid of dairy, whether they're vegan or not, but if they're getting rid of dairy, it's a big source of them. So where are they getting, creatine, for example, seeds? Again, these are foods that may not be super high in the vegan diet, so you do want to consider, well, are they the picky kind of vegan, or are they open to expanding their palate a bit more? But nuts and seeds are going to be really great sources. There's another, seaweed. Seaweed's another great one, and probably other algae too. But again, we're talking about nuts and seeds and algae. These aren't typically common in the American, standard American diet, but they are sources of creatine. Are they as good as sources as animal-based foods? No, I will admit that, especially not in volume. And so you do need to pay attention to that. You need to consider their physical activity level. And at that point, you might want to consider supplementation, depending again on their needs and on their willingness to increase these other foods.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, or you're kind of alluding to it, which is there's definitely an unhealthy way to do vegan diets, which is eating pasta and refined carbohydrates and just relying on that. And then there's a more healthy way, which is you're eating lots of fruits and vegetables, legumes, seeds and nuts, sea vegetables, all this stuff, and really diversifying your intake. So I'll just briefly introduce the keto diet. So the keto diet is about 70 to 80% fat, 10 to 15% protein, and then 5 to 10% carbohydrates, depending on how you do it. So it's very, very, very high fat, very low carbohydrate, I should say. And that's net carbohydrates. So that's total carbohydrates minus fiber. So fiber doesn't count because you don't absorb it. And so what this is aiming to do is put you in something called ketosis, which is making your body run on fat instead of on sugar and glucose, which is what it normally runs on. And that changes a lot of metabolic profiles. So there's been research on this in diabetes and obesity. It's kind of counterintuitive with obesity. We think like, oh, that person has a lot of adipose tissue on their body. Why would they eat more fat? But that came from the sugar industry lobbying to make fat look bad and make sugar look good, when really in reality sugar contributes more to especially abdominal adipose tissue more so than actual fat. So that's a food policy piece in there. And so that's the keto diet. There's a number of other health benefits to a lot of bro science behind it. People who are trying to bulk up and lose weight really quickly. Keto diet is good, but you gain the weight back really quickly once you're off it. So then there's the vegetarian diet, which Will alluded to. So it's essentially vegan diet plus egg and dairy products. This is the Mediterranean diet. I've spoken a bit about this in the past. This is one of my favorite diets just because I feel, or nutrition patterns, because I feel like it's very easily adaptable. And then it's also talking about ancestral diets and traditional diets. This is one that is involved in, it is a very long history of diet. There's these areas called blue zones, which have the most centenarians, so people living over 100 in an area. And so a lot of those areas follow. One of them is a Mediterranean style diet. One of them is a vegan diet. And so this one focuses very much on plants, you know, whole fruits and vegetables, a lot of whole grains, some processed whole grains, but mostly in whole wheat form. And then adding in a lot of seafood, and then some poultry, eggs and cheese, and then a little bit of meat and sweets, but like really not much. And usually it's lamb, it's not usually beef, but really using those more as a condiment than a staple of protein. So then there's a blood type diet, which we talked about. So that's based on your blood type. So if you don't know your blood type, that's something that you can easily have done when you go to the doctor's office. This was pioneered by a naturopath, Peter D'Adamo. And this is based off of something called lectins, which there is a protein that gets expressed on your blood cells, and then also on food. Different food expresses lectins. And so it's about pairing different food types with your blood type based on this lectin presentation. So A blood types are usually the vegetarians. B blood types, they call it the nomads, so hunters and gatherers. They don't do a lot, or no, sorry, that's more of the O type. But B's, the big things are no chicken, no tomato, no avocado. There's a couple of random things, not a lot of fruit, very specific fruits. O is kind of your more paleo style, so your hunter-gatherer, a lot of meats, vegetable, not a lot of grains. And then AB is kind of a mix between a lot of them. So that's the book, Eat Right for Your Blood Type, if you want to explore that more. Then there's the macrobiotic diet. So the macrobiotic diet was pioneered by this person, Mikio Kushi, and there's the Kushi Institute. And this is based on kind of more of an ancestral approach to diets, saying, well, you know, it's kind of paleo-like, but more so it switches the meat and the grains. So it has 40 to 60% whole grains, lots of vegetables, lots of sea vegetables, and pickled vegetables as well. Then we have legumes. And then up here at the very top, we kind of have our meat and seafood used very, very infrequently. So this is another nutrition style. And then we have the low FODMAP diet. And I know this has come up a lot, so I wanted to make sure we touched upon this. So FODMAPs, it's often called the FODMAP diet, but it's actually a low FODMAP. So FODMAP stands for fermentable oligosaccharide, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. So really what that means, it's really 5 sugars. All of those are sugars. So lactose, fructose, fructans, galactose, and polyols. And the concept is that there are certain people who don't absorb those sugars very well or don't process those sugars very well. And that can cause gas, bloating, abdominal pain, nausea, diarrhea, and constipation, kind of like that IBS picture, chronic GI issue picture. And so they have these 3 steps to the low FODMAP diet where you eliminate all these foods. And then sometimes that's where people get stuck, is they just eliminate them. But really what you're supposed to do is then, after eliminating them for a number of time, healing your gut, introducing them one by one, and seeing how that goes. So some people, although, kind of get stuck in that elimination and feel like they can never add those things back in. And we talked about that last week, where that can lead to a lot of imbalance, because if you see it's a lot of fruit that you have to eliminate, and a lot of vegetables that you have to eliminate, and legumes. So you're missing a lot of fiber when you do that. And there's so many more diets or nutrition styles. As keto is kind of new, not that it's new in theory, but it's new in popularity. So there's always going to be different things. Dr. Eric Pepper brought up a really good question at the break. And so I'll kind of address this now as we're talking about all these different things, which is, we know what to eat. There's so much information out there, but why don't we, why is it so hard for people to make change? Even though we know, like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be eating more vegetables and less refined carbohydrates and all this. And this brings up a really big piece of food relationship. Food for a lot of us fills a lot of needs. For some of us, it's emotional. For some of us, it's physical. Sometimes we get bored and we eat. I know, like, I'll give an example of a patient. I was talking to her because I talk a lot about food relationship with my patients. She doesn't like being restricted in what she eats. When I was talking about, maybe we should look into food intolerances, she says, I don't want to restrict my diet at all. I said, okay, well, let's explore that more. Not that I think that's a bad thing or that I'm trying to push you. I'm just curious, why that is. And she goes, well, I lived in a really restrictive household growing up, and my parents really controlled what I eat. And then when I got to college, I could make my own decisions. So I ate whatever I want. And now that I'm out of college and I have a job and I can support myself, I can afford to eat whatever I want, and I can make those choices because I'm an adult. So to her, the underlying theme there was food was really about freedom. Freedom from restriction from her parents, both in food and in just her habits and what she was able to do and not do under their household. So that is what food represented for her, was that freedom. For other people, it's a reward. For other people, it's, it provides a rush of dopamine. It's what makes them feel good. And so addressing these relationship pieces is really, really important when making sustainable change. And this could be a whole lecture on its own. So that's all I'm going to say about that now. But know that that is a really important piece when you're talking about making food choices and food changes, is what's my relationship with food, and how is that impacting my habits and my behavior. All right, so let me see what time it is real quick. Okay, so we're right on time. But I just have a couple more random pieces that Ken thought might be interesting to share. So I'll just go over this real quick. So fasting is also a nutrition style, nutrition habit. There's different types of fasting. There's intermittent fasting, which is fewer than 24 hours. People always ask me, what's the optimum? 16 is a number that gets thrown around, but I've looked into the research quite a bit. It's anything more than 12, you achieve the benefits. So just know that. I personally do 13. That's just the number that I found works really well for me in my eating habits. So don't feel super stressed to try to hit 16, because that's hard. There's also alternate day fasting, or some people will do 5 days on in a week and 2 days off. There's also extended fasting. So that's like, they say 3 to 5. So I've done a number of 5-day fasts. There's a lot of benefits to prolonged fasting every so often. So I do it about 2 to 3 times a year. It's also, I do it a lot with my cancer patients too, around chemo. There's a lot of research on that, and that's a whole nother conversation. And then there's fat fasting, which is kind of like the keto diet, where you eat a lot of fat and it puts you into ketosis, which your body kind of gets into a fasting state. But what I really like about just straight fasting and not eating anything while you're fasting is you really give your gut rest, and your gut ability to relax. And that's why I like the prolonged 5-day fast, is you really get really give your bowels a time to rest. So some of the benefits, it says benefits of intermittent fasting, but this is the benefits of fasting in general, is you get improved brain function. One of the big pieces, more than anything, is improved glucose tolerance. So it helps reduce insulin resistance. And so people with diabetes, this can be really helpful, or anywhere just on the spectrum of insulin resistance. This can really help. Because of that, it can help promote weight loss, because you're helping re-regulate your metabolic system. It also boosts the immune system and helps prevent cancer, because when you fast, you get into something called autophagy, which is your body goes, your immune system goes and it looks around and it says which cells are kind of acting funny or aren't listening to the signals and need to be eliminated. And so that can help eliminate cancer cells before they really take hold and become a tumor. And then, yeah, increased fat metabolism as your body switches from using glucose as a fuel source to fat as a fuel source, and improved heart function for all of these reasons. So again, this could be a whole lecture on its own. So this is just a brief introduction into fasting. And then another piece of all of this is detox and the liver. And so there's a lot of things you can do with food to help detox. I would say one of the biggest things is eliminate your food intolerance, as I was talking about, so that you're not building up those toxic metabolites in your body that your liver then has to figure out how to process if it can. Eating lots of fiber, because your fiber is going to help you eliminate toxins from your colon. Drinking lots of water. And then there's some specific vegetables that really help the liver. Your liver is a big detox organ. So dark leafy greens, beets, avocados, artichoke, asparagus, and tomatoes. Also legumes, which are legumes, seeds, and nuts, and whole grains, which are really great fiber sources. And then I threw some supplements on the end too that just help support liver function. So again, this could be a whole nother lecture. There's other things too, lifestyle things, skin brushing, sauna, sweating, that really help detox. And there's some other parsley, cilantro, and celery that kind of bind toxins and help you eliminate them as well. If anybody has any questions or feel like their question wasn't answered, you're definitely welcome to message me. So, cows were only really present in Northern Europe, not even Southern or Eastern Europe, so just Northern Europe. So since most of the world doesn't come from that region, that's why in general, the paleo diet, like if you're talking about in general for most people, that's why dairy is usually not involved in that, because cows just wouldn't be around where those people are. So that's why. But if you're from Northern Europe, or you're descended from Northern Europe, your body's much more easily able to tolerate dairy. Depends. I think if you feel fatigued on a certain diet, that it may just not be the right diet for you or a nutrition style for you. Is there a good time? I don't think there's ever a good time. Maybe when you're not so busy, because some of them may require you cooking more for yourself. Mm-hmm. And so maybe at a time where you're home and not during finals, and give yourself some leeway during finals.
Well, he goes on, can we try these diets and gain weight at the same time?
Yeah. I mean, gaining weight is, and the importance or detriment of gaining weight is a really individual thing. It depends on where you're starting. If you're coming from a place of malnourishment and you switch to a diet that works for you, you're going to gain weight, and that's going to be a really healthy thing. If you're switching, let's say, to a diet or nutrition style and you want to go vegan, but right now you don't have time to cook for yourself, so you're just eating a lot of refined carbohydrates, you may gain weight, and that may not be a good gaining weight. So that's just a very individual thing.
Here's one more from Celestina. When doing an elimination diet and cutting out all trigger foods, what do you recommend eating for those 3 weeks?
Lots of vegetables. Lots and lots of vegetables. Yeah, so the elimination diet is hard to do kind of blindly because so I did one actually when I was at SF State. And so I eliminated meat, dairy, peanuts, and nightshades, which left beans, rice, and other vegetables that weren't nightshades. People react to beans. It may not react to meat. So I think it's just about playing around with it. Trying different things and maybe eliminating different things at different times and seeing how that works. A really good question. I think it depends on where the cellulose comes from. So all vegetable has insoluble fiber that we don't digest. That's what comes out and makes our poops really nice and formed. So the cellulose, it depends. So like a lot of cellulose, especially like cellulose that supplement capsules are made out of, come from potato cellulose. So I, being intolerant to potato, have had to go through and figure out which capsules are made of potato cellulose. Corn is also used. Some other things are used. So I can do the corn and other ones, but the potato cellulose, no, for me personally, because I'm intolerant to potato, I can't, my body doesn't really do well with those. So I would say it depends on what the cellulose is made out of, but not inherently, because all vegetables have insoluble fiber.
When someone commented, because something came up, tofu is it greater than meat? I will just say, from a nutritional diversity standpoint, it gives you more calcium. It's a great source of iron. So depending on the meat, it might be better. If you're doing tempeh, you're looking at getting some extra, because it's fermented, some extra good beneficial bacteria in there. So in many ways, it can be. I don't know if it's an exact, fair to say it's a direct comparison, but in many ways, tofu tempeh is a phenomenal food. Again, if you can tolerate it, and if you have access to it.
I think that's really good. Kind of going back to what Ken was talking about in the first place, it really gets you to focus on whole foods, no refined carbohydrates. It does eliminate grains, which works great for some people and doesn't work great for other people. So I think it's, again, that's one that could very easily be included on that list of ones that I went through, dietary patterns to play around with and see if your body tolerates really well. But I think anything that puts you on a more whole foods diet or, whole foods nutrition style is going to be beneficial.
If I can chime in, I think that it gets you to pay attention to your food, which is so key. I mean, that's when people are coming to me, what I often say is, I would love to work with you, but if not, I'd love that you're just looking into paying attention to your food and maybe seeking out some nutritional support, because you're already open to learning. And I think when you do that, and when you do something like Whole30, you're going to learn so much, not only about food, but how food affects you. And I think that's key for anyone's journey. So I love Whole30 for that reason.
Oh, and that actually reminded me of something that I wanted to bring up when we were talking about food versus food product, and we're talking about intolerance. So some of the major things, intolerances are, soy, dairy, corn, potato is also a big one, not really talked about, but it is pretty common. Those products get put in so many foods nowadays. I was telling Ken on a phone call earlier, lactoferrin is something that is used in food processing because it's it helps prevent E. coli growing on food. And so they'll take spinach and dip it in lactoferrin, or meat or fish and dip it in lactoferrin to prevent E. coli from growing on it while it goes to the grocery store. And that's dairy based. Now, they don't list that because they don't have to. It's such a small piece of it. But if you're intolerant to dairy, you're still getting exposed to dairy. Same with potato, talking about cellulose or potato starch, or guar gum and xanthan gum is often derived from potato. And that's in so many, I know this because I eat it. Because I've had to pay attention. And even so salt too. So dextrose is a potato derived sugar. We took our salt supply, we iodized it because people were deficient in iodine. Then it caked with the iodine, so we added an anti-caking agent. Well, that didn't taste very good, so then we added dextrose. So when you get table salt, especially like some Morton salt is pretty notorious for this, you're getting salt, iodine, anti-caking agent, and dextrose, which is potato, all in your salt. And so it's just incredible what we've done to how complicated we've made our food supply. When you're talking about really we're eliminating these intolerances, it used to be 50 years ago, you say, don't eat potato. Okay, you just didn't eat a potato. It's not that simple anymore. So I wanted to present a recipe today that would be easily modifiable based on whatever nutrition pattern that you wanted to. And so I have a very simple kind of nuts and bolts of a recipe that can be easily modifiable. So that's a protein source, a vegetable source, a grain, although if you're doing keto, you could do cauliflower rice instead of actual rice, and then a sauce. And that's all you need for a healthy meal. So the protein source could be anything. It could be some fried tofu, it could be some chicken, it could be some seafood cooked up. Then you just saute some veggies really quick, whatever's in your fridge. I think onion and garlic are a great staple for everything, but if you do onion, garlic, some broccoli, some carrot, boom. Then you make a grain or some cauliflower rice on the side, and then you're good to go. And then the only thing is, like, people say, oh, that's not flavorful. So if you can, and if you, I put my email in the chat and I can include this, but if you email me, I have a whole handout with a bunch of sauce recipes. And I think that's just really nice to, like, I make, because I'm so hyper focused on not having all these processed foods, I make my own sauces. I keep them in containers in the fridge. And then whenever I want a sauce, I'm just like, okay, just grab that sauce and I use it. You can also buy, there's better store made sauces nowadays than there used to be. And it depends on where you shop. But I still think it's cheaper to make your own and healthier to make your
So
own.
thank you everyone that's been attending. It's been great to be with you. I hope you got something from the series. Hope you enjoyed this. And I know, Marissa, you also have you're also doing recipes and other things online. Would you have any contact information for that?
Yeah, so you can just look me up on YouTube. I can find the link real quick. But I have a YouTube channel where I post recipes, kind of like cooking tutorials. I try to do them every other week. It used to be every week, but now it's every other week. So if you have any interest, feel free to follow me on YouTube. I have a ton of followers. I do it just for fun. And you can check out my my cooking tutorials.